Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to Whimsical and Interesting Musings, the show that brings you whimsical and interesting thoughts every day, all year round. And today I'm going to be talking about a game that I just finished this evening, Uncharted 1, Drake's Fortune. And this is the first game in the Uncharted series following our main protagonist, Nathan Drake, who's a descendant of Sir Francis Drake, and in this particular game he is en route to find the treasure of Sir Francis Drake and the treasure of El Dorado. Along the way he is joined by his treasure hunting partner Vic Sullivan and a news reporter by the name of Elena. The majority of this game is pretty much structured like a straightforward adventure game. It's third person and you control Nathan Drake throughout the majority of it. You have different sections involving stealth, puzzle solving, and also jet ski mini games as well that you can get through to, play in all these different areas where it involves you travelling across water. And this game, for all intents and purposes, is a really fun game. In fact, I was actually a huge fan of this game before I'd even sat down to play it, because the idea of essentially making a game that is like those classic adventure films like Indiana Jones and The Mummy and all sorts of other shows of that era, essentially, where a group of adventurers have to go on, and of course, including the Lara Croft Tomb Raider video games in this as well, where they basically are adventure games about a treasure hunter or an architect or archaeologist, trying to find the treasure of a certain person or try to find a lost city that's been lost to time and is pretty ancient and in ruin. There's all sorts of things that these treasure hunting adventure thrill seeker type stories like to entail, and Uncharted is no exception to this. It's because of this that I actually became a huge fan of the of the Uncharted series anyway. So to me it had a very special place in my heart, and it actually had something to do with me wanting to actually play the game. And the majority of this game is focused on Nathan and Sullivan and Elena trying to get this treasure. Elena wants to do it for a television broadcast. She wants to basically track down an ancient civilization and see if it still thrives. But because in the nature of the business, there's always something, up her sleeve, and she's always willing to, keep stuff hidden so that she can get a good story and she can get people to pretty much do unethical things for the right price. But she's not the only one who's able to do this. Nathan Drake can also bend the truth to his advantage as well in the very opening scene, where they are attacked on their yacht by mercenary soldiers who are trying to stop them and murder them for trying to go after the treasure of El Dorado. And the majority of this game is pretty much sectioned off into all these different areas. For the most part, you are in one location and you have to do puzzle solving, combat, and jet ski mini games where you have to try to get away and try to traverse across water. There's also a mini section where you have to basically fire a turret gun while you're in a moving truck, and there's a lot of high octane stuff going on. So this game pretty much is structured pretty much in a very straightforward way in the third person. You have an assortment of weapons, a firearm, sort of like a pistol, and a machine gun or shotgun. Two basic guns, and you can use your fists as well if you press square. And you can control these guns by either aiming with the R1 trigger and shooting with the aiming with the L1 trigger and firing with the R1 trigger. And this might seem quite straightforward, but when I'm actually playing these sorts of games, it is very nerve-wracking because you have to get the aiming just right to get a headshot in there. And if you do enough headshots, you win a trophy for it. So Yes, I didn't actually intentionally get as many headshots, but I ended up doing so anyway because I ended up dying so many times. I ended up just breezing through it and just magically firing off headshots randomly to all these different mercenaries and all these different soldiers. That I was actually quite pleased. I was actually quite pleased with myself by the end of the game, and I really did find it such a drag of an experience when it came to the combat because sorry, I'm sounding very throaty today. The combat is very kind of strenuous, and they do often come in waves. Like there's this one section at the very beginning of the island level, which is the main location that you're in throughout the game, where you are just greeted with droves upon droves upon droves, waves upon waves of mercenary soldiers who are just firing at you. And this can be okay if there's a good pause where you're just exploring the jungle and you're exploring all the different, ruins and what have you. But sometimes it doesn't give you a chance to breathe, and sometimes the waves can just come one after the other, and it can get very boring and very tedious after a while. And especially for someone like me who kind of finds combat very difficult to do in video games anyway, unless of course it's hand-to-hand combat like swords and shields and magic and all these other sorts of things. It's very difficult to keep track of, how much you should be serving your ammunition, how much you should be using strategy and stealth to get through a certain level of combat without having to, just go all gung-ho and guns blazing into a battlefield with no real protection. And one of the things that I think is very difficult about this game is sometimes you can feel like you're taking on a bit too much, and the way the health system works in this particular game is it's like Call of Duty, where if you are behind something and you are in the red or in the black and white, as this game likes to show you as, all you have to do is hide behind something and wait, and then when the picture is restored to full colour, then you can resume your combat. You can resume, firing your weapons and all these other things and throwing your grenades. I could not master how to throw the grenades effectively, so I ended up not using them. So whenever I collected them, they almost felt like they were wasted, me carrying them, because I just didn't know how to control the distance of how and how far I should throw the particular grenades. And it actually became very frustrating, so I ended up just picking them up just for the sake of it and not really using them for any real combat purposes. Now that we've gone on to the gameplay, which is a very particular part of the game, I want to talk about one of my favourite parts of this particular game, which is the puzzles. A lot of the puzzles are very environmentally based, kind of like The Legend of Zelda or the God of War series. And in this particular game, it is very straightforward. A lot of the puzzles do kind of have a very straightforward solution. But if you find yourself getting stuck, you just have to open Sir Francis Drake's journal, pressing the L2 trigger, and he'll just open it up, and you'll see a lot of the hints in the actual book itself, in the notes itself. But yeah, these puzzles are very easy, and I found myself, really enjoying figuring them out on my own without referring to the book. But whenever I did get stuck, I would refer to the book constantly. Whenever I did get stuck, I would refer to the book anyway. But I really enjoyed figuring out a lot of the puzzles on my own, and I really do love having that eureka moment where I've actually figured it out without using any of the hints. And that's one of the beauties of Uncharted, is you really do get the opportunity to really kind of have those moments where it really gets the chance to test your intelligence in a way. And I was really pleased that I found myself going, yeah, I actually figured it out. I actually figured it out all by myself, which was really wonderful. And it's such a great moment when that happens, like you're going, yes, I figured it out. But it does have moments where you do find where I was kind of struggling on certain environmental puzzles, but they were more, to get from one switch to the other without, falling over or anything like that, or falling off the stage and dying, which is what happens in one scene when you're on the upper levels of a church. But the puzzles were very easy and they were very fun to do, and when I actually solved a puzzle, or when I solved several puzzles, I would always feel very proud of myself because I'd always get it right without having to refer to hints. And it's an incredible experience, and if you're a huge puzzle lover like I am, this game's definitely for you. It really does have that kind of feel to it. But what's very interesting about this particular game is the characters. Nathan Drake is probably the most charismatic and the most fun video game protagonist I've seen in a long time, and he definitely is very funny. He has a great, back and forth with him and his companions, such as Sullivan or Sully and Elena, and he really just is an incredibly, tenacious, fly by the seat of your pants kind of adventurer. He is this kind of guy who, when he's in these difficult situations, you can tell he doesn't want to be in them. Like when he's under gunfire, like a lot of us are, like a lot of us are in that. If we ever found ourselves in this situation, we would be like him, where we'd be thinking to ourselves, "I am not prepared for this. I have to try to figure out a way to get out of this without getting shot at or shot entirely." And he has a lot of charisma. He's very, likable, and whenever you find him in a situation where he gets angry, it usually is at the cost of someone's life being threatened, like when Elena or Sully is under risk of dying or getting shot by the villains. He really does show his sense of loyalty to them, and he will always do whatever he can to get himself out of situations, but he'll always try to think of Sully and Elena first of all. And that's one of the things I really like about Nathan as a character, and he's just really likeable to be around. So when you do have him comment on certain things, it really does feel like you've got a little companion with you as you're going through the actual game, and it was a lot of fun actually controlling him. The quick time events were unforgiving. The combat wasn't particularly my cup of tea, but I did find myself, getting through it, and often, a lot of the times, the combat can be very kind of en masse at times, to the point where it actually becomes tedious and boring after a while. But what's very good about it is they do have intervals of you exploring and running through certain places and picking up items and secrets and doing puzzles, that when the combat does come into effect again, you don't feel like it's too heavy-handed. It has the right amount of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving and story to really keep you engaged and really kind of feel like there's enough variety in this game for you to not get bored or to feel frustrated, even though the combat did make me feel kind of frustrated after a while because of those waves and waves of mercenaries, and it just kind of felt overwhelming at times, and I actually got very tired very quickly. Every single time I died, I would always go to myself, I'm really bloody tired. I don't want to keep, firing shots at these mercenaries who won't die after one hit. And it can get to that stage where you're just thinking, come on, please, just let's move on. And this game's actually pretty intelligent in regards to its story, because the character of Nathan is obviously related to Sir Francis Drake. Francis Drake is his ancestor, and he's after the treasure of El Dorado. And this treasure has been kept secret for many years for a good reason. And for the longest time, you're kind of playing it like you're playing a video game version of Indiana Jones or something like that, where the majority of the combat and the conflict comes from other mercenaries, people who use guns, knives, and their fists to really kind of highlight that they're after the treasure as well, and they want the same fortune and glory as you. But as the story goes on and as the plot starts to thicken, we realise that there's more to this treasure than meets the eye. And when I found out that there were these crawler from the Descent type creatures in the game halfway through, as I was fighting my way through waves and waves of more mercenaries, and I was with Eddie, who basically is like the Uncharted equivalent of Omid Dajir's character in The Mummy, the prison ward guy who's very greedy and into treasure and searching for treasure and keeping it for himself, for riches and all sorts of other things. And he's also the Uncharted equivalent of I've forgotten that guy's name in Indiana Jones. He was played by the guy who plays Gimli in Lord of the Rings, and that guy, he's pretty much like him, where if you cross him, he'll happily, throw you to the wolves, and if you don't cross him and you play nice and you give him his cut of the treasure, then he will be your best friend for life, and you'll be bonded by blood, and this great experience. But he's been double-crossed by Nathan Drake more times than we can count. So he's now completely utterly fed up with Nathan Drake, and he wants to get his cut of the treasure. And the only way he's going to do that is to help this villain guy, who is unsurprisingly British. And I hate it when adventure stories either go from one extreme to the next. The villains are always in American stories and American properties, always either Russian or they're either British. And I hate it when when villains are British, because it always kind of makes me think, oh god, do they really think that low of us? Like, are we really that seedy and, manipulative? Because if you actually think about how British villains are, like, we wouldn't be like that. Well, we'd be, we'd be more butch, and we'd be more like, we'd be more like Ray Winston as opposed to Tom Hiddleston, kind of. So, oh yeah, I don't really get it, really, to be honest. But yeah, I hate the fact that he's British. But he's a guy who wants fortune and glory, and he's going to get it by any means necessary. And if Nathan Drake and Sully are in the way, then he'll quite happily kill them off. But halfway through the game, these crawler-type creatures, these humanoid crawler-type creatures pop up. And I was actually quite surprised, because I had no idea that this was going to turn into survival horror. And for the longest time, I actually found myself going, this is actually really cool. I'm glad it took this twist where you think it's going to be one thing, and then it very slowly, morphs into another thing as time goes on. But when it got to the stage where I was actually fighting these things with a machine gun, it actually got very tedious. There's this one scene where it's kind of like a survival horror game, like a Resident Evil or a Silent Hill, where you're going through these abandoned corridors, and you have to basically fight off waves and waves and waves of these descendant characters, these, reanimated, rage-fueled, leftovers of the Spanish Armada. And it can be very difficult, because there's this one instance where they would grab you, and then you'd have to do something. You'd have to do sort of like a quick time action, which is either jolt the controller if you're doing it for the PS3, or you have to press X. Why they couldn't have just made it press X for PS3, I have no idea. But apparently that was something that they did for the remastered version for the PS4, because in the PS4 version, you pretty much have to just press X. Like, that's the easiest thing you can do to fight these things off. But if you fail to jolt the controller, you will pretty much have your throat ripped out, and the creatures will just leave you for dead. And it's horrific, but at the same time, I kept thinking to myself, I'm so glad they changed it for the PS4 remastered version, because honestly, I found it so frustrating whenever it got to that quick time event thing, that whenever I tried to jolt the controller to get them off of me, I would just basically have that death animation happen anyway. And I even said through gritted teeth and frustration, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, it gets so infuriating at times that it actually became very, horrible for me in terms of playing it. But when I finally got past that stage and I managed to not die and get into that quick time death phase, I found myself really kind of enjoying the progression of the story, and I found myself thinking, this treasure's cursed. Why do all these people want it? Like, Nathan Drake knows the score now. He knows what this treasure could do to people, so he has to now try to convince the villains peacefully to not take this treasure back to civilization, because if they do, the whole entire world is basically doomed. And the villains won't listen to their great stubbornness, and Nathan has to basically save the day. And the last few scenes, the last few chapters of this game are just waves upon waves of action. And depending on how you view action in games and combat and shooting, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it, based on these continuous waves of mercenaries shooting at you, descendants coming at you and trying to tear your throat out, and other things happening as well. So it can go either way if you're of any kind of, if you have any kind of interest in the combat of these particular games. But the ride was very good, and I found myself really enjoying the characters, and the story was an intriguing story that made me want to keep playing. And if I hadn't had the story, I don't think I would have remembered this game in any great hurry. But thankfully, the dialogue is witty, the characters are very charismatic and interesting, and the overall world building is fantastically done to the point where you feel like all the pieces fit together quite nicely into this grand puzzle that is the finished product of the game. And I'm going to give Uncharted Drake's Fortune a 5 out of 5 stars. This is an incredible, incredible game, and it's well worth the playthrough alone. There are going to be some moments where, like me, you might get frustrated with the combat, or you might get frustrated that there's not enough, puzzles, or there's not enough, moments where you can breathe. But to me, I personally think that there's enough variety in this game and in these levels and in these set pieces to make you feel like when the combat does hit, you really do feel like it's a great way of keeping the game going and really keeping you on your toes as a player. And I would definitely recommend Uncharted. Drake's Fortune is it's one of the games that genuinely did surprise me at how good the storytelling was and how great the characters were, and I can't wait to follow Nathan Drake and Sully on their next adventure on Uncharted 2: Among Thieves. And I will be playing that at some point soon this week, but I'm not going to do it in any big hurry because I'm very tired and I just finished this game and I feel so worn out that I just want to have a cup of tea and just sit down and watch some Avatar. That's going to be my next overview for Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and look forward to more videos very soon. This has been me, Josh, with Whimsical and Interesting Musings, bringing you whimsical and interesting thoughts every day, all year round. Take care, bye-bye for now.